Pikachu was such a popular Pokemon that Game Freak decided to create many more of them, though with slight changes so they're not exactly the same thing. Collectively, these Pokemon are known as Pika Clones, which is pretty self-explanatory. I will be attempting to complete a hardcore Nuzlocke of Pokémon Emerald using only the Pika Clones. This is a modified version of the game which has all of the new features and Pokemon up to Generation 9. Before we begin, which is your favorite Pika Clone? And be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell for more unique runs just like this one. To make this more interesting, I've decided to play through as Poké Kid. You know, the trainers in the games who only have Pikachus. This naturally means that my rival is the Poké Kid Eevee version. Though I would normally choose Eevee over Pikachu any day, in this run I have to pretend that the electric rodent Pokemon are superior. We'll see if I can do it. Speaking of, when saving Birch, I have a couple of options here, but I decide to just go with Pichu, the original rodent. Oh, by the way, my costume is so good, the back sprite looks exactly like a Pikachu. Impressive, huh? Pichu easily defeats Zigzagoon, then after a bit of leveling up, it's time to face off against May. OG Pika wins that battle in a few Thunder Shocks, mostly because I was 3 levels higher. Jumping ahead to Petalburg, I can see the disappointment in my father's eyes as I walk into town proudly wearing my Pikachu onesie. He had expected me to grow out of it by now, but my love for Pikachu will never fade. At least, not till this video is over. I get through the Petalburg woods easily enough, but encounter a major obstacle past Rustboro, the most fearsome and deadly Pokemon you ever did see, a Shroomish. They may look cute, but this grass mushroom is a huge issue, because Pichu doesn't learn any normal moves, and Shroomish loves to inflict status effects. Not to mention the fact that he has Leech Seed, so it doesn't take long before I wipe to some random nobody trainer. What a Karen. On the next attempt, I not only spend the time to evolve OG Pika, but masterfully avoid Karen. Though that was pointless, as there are several more battles here before I can access Wishmere Tunnel. And Lil Johnson over there just so happens to have a Shroomish. Obviously, this means death for OG yet again. On my third attempt, I mix it up and instead of choosing the OG Pika, I choose the newest one in Pommy. I'm able to avoid most of the trainers here, but not everyone. Thankfully, Buff Pika learns Dig right at the level cap, so he's able to take out some of the hikers. Finally, I get to this tunnel where all of the Pika clones can be found. I've decided to get one now, and then one more after each gym. And my second Pika clone ends up being Morpeko, the second most recent. I guess I'm doing reverse order for now. I've never used one of these things before, so we'll see how it goes. Getting him now was actually pretty lucky, since Morpeko can learn Bullet Seed. Naturally, this means I lead with Mad Pika to Bullet Seed Geodude in 2 hits. For Nose Pass, Mad Pika starts with a defense-lowering Tail Whip, and is slowed down by Rock Tomb. He still outspeeds, of course, and hits an incredible 2-hit Bullet Seed. Sometimes I hate multi-hit moves. Mad Pika heals with a berry, and next turn a 3-hit Bullet Seed finishes off the nose. Last is another Geodude, who suffers the same fate as the first. With Dig, Buff Pika would have had a minor chance at soloing this gym, but I'm glad she wasn't left alone. With that badge in hand, I head back to the tunnel. Some Wingull stuff happens, but more importantly, I find a Wishmere? That was a mistake. Actually, I find a Dedenne. Not the Emolga I was hoping for, but still not bad. Before leaving town, Buff Pika gets even more buff and learns how to stand properly, just in time for another rival battle where I can prove Pika supremacy. But this time, May has 3 Pokemon, and they are all fully evolved, which is fair since I have 2 single-stage Pokemon. Buff Pika starts by Thunder Shocking Vaporeon a few times, but her attack gets lowered and I don't want to stay in. So I swap to Mad Pika at the same time she pivots to Jolteon. Okay, I guess. Mad Pika hits a single 4-hit Bullet Seed, which does a decent amount, but I need Buff Pika back out. She is sand attacked and starts to Dig, while Jolteon mimics her move and also uses Dig. That's really not fair. After being dugged, she is hit with her own Dig to defeat Jolteon. Vaporeon does manage to Quick Attack before being Thunder Shocked. On Flareon, I probably should have swapped, but Buff Pika knows Dig, so I leave her in. She is sand attacked, and her attack is lowered so much that Flareon survives 2 hits. but one last Thundershock does win me that battle. One super exciting boat ride later, and I encounter Brawly. Buff Pika starts off with another multi-hit move, Arm Thrust, that hits 2 whole times. Yay! And Machop starts to bulk up. So she switches to Thundershock, but 2 more hits is barely not enough, and she is hit by a really strong Karate Chop. She heals with a berry and gets one last hit in, which paralyzes, so that's nice. I then swap to Fairy Pika. Now he doesn't know any fairy moves, but at least he resists fighting. 2 Thundershocks defeats the Machop. Meditite's only attacking move is Focus Punch, so Fairy Pika is in no danger here whatsoever. Of course he can use Light Screen, so that's unfortunate. I need to try and defeat this guy right as the screen wears off, so I stall a bit with Nuzzle. Eventually it does wear off, but I mistimed it, and Meditite Light Screens again, so we're right back to stalling. Several hits later, Nuzzle takes him out right as the light screen ends, which was perfect. Against Makuhita, Fairy Pika starts with a Nuzzle, and then just spams Thundershock. To ensure this sumo dies without being healed, when he gets down to the yellow, Fairy uses Charge, and that double-powered Thundershock defeats the second gym leader. I had hoped that Buff Pika would do a bit more in that fight, but obviously Mad Pika stood no chance. The next encounter I get is a Minun. These two are quite possibly my least favorite Pika clones. I've just never really liked them. On my way to Mauville, I take a few seconds out of my busy day to absolutely wreck these fake Pika fans. I'm the only true fan after all. Unfortunately, this brings me head to head with the Eevee fan, May. Since I have 4 Pokemon, she does too. This time I start with Mad Pika. Even though he's an electric type, Bullet Seed is stronger against Vaporeon. After a 3-hit seed, he uses Tail Whip, guaranteeing a knockout next turn. Flareon is next, and he starts with a Quick Attack, while also being Tail Whipped. I then pivot to Buff Pika, who is Quick Attacked a few times, but digs a hole to defeat the Flare. She tries to do the same thing to Jolteon, but May pivots to Umbreon instead. A 4-hit Arm Thrust does a decent amount, actually, but Buff Pika is then confused. I don't have any Person Berries yet, so I pivot to Fairy Pika to paralyze Umbreon, but after a single hit, he too is confused. Minus Pika comes out on a Quick Attack, and Encores to prevent any more confusion. May didn't like that though, because as Umbreon is about to die, she swaps back to Jolteon to absorb the hit. What a jerk. We trade Swift and Quick Attack back and forth, till I need to retreat in place of Fairy Pika. It still takes 2 cuts, because his attack isn't great, but Jolteon is knocked out. This brings out the paralyzed and basically dead Umbreon, who gave me so much trouble. One final hit defeats May. I know I'm supposed to try and upsell the Pika clones right now, but after a battle like that, it should be obvious why the evolutions are better. Anyway, since Pawmo normally evolves through the Let's Go feature, which does not exist here, I changed it to be based on friendship, meaning Buff Pika evolves just in time for Watson. That, coupled with a held soft sand, makes this a simple battle. Voltorb is immediately dug, as is Magneton since he has Magnet Pull and not Sturdy. Manectric would survive a non-crit, so first Buff Pika hits him a few times with his wailing arms. Then while he's underground, Watson sacrifices his Electrike, which does literally nothing because next turn, Manectric is still dug to death. Can you believe he calls himself an electric gym leader, but doesn't even have a single Pika clone? Pathetic. The next Pika clone on the docket is Emolga, one of the more unique ones in my opinion, and a pretty awesome Pika clone. At this point, as I'm basking in the glory of my awesome Pika team, I discover that they have been infected with Pokérus. I believe that this is the second time since starting my channel over 2 years ago I've had infected Pokemon. And considering that I play Pokemon basically day and night at this point, it shows you just how rare that is. Jumping ahead to Maxie, I lead with Fairy Pika, who gets intimidated. She avoids 2 Swaggers and defeats the Dark Dog with Parabolic Charges. This baits out Camerupt, but thankfully, I have Flying Pika to avoid the Bulldoze. He uses an itemless Acrobatics, doing a ton of damage as Camerupt tries and fails to Amnesia. Last is Zubat, who is promptly Shockwaved. I had actually hoped for a different Pika instead of Emolga here, but maybe getting him was pretty lucky, all things considered. I admit, I'm not looking forward to this Flannery battle at all. Mad Pika starts with a Black Glasses boosted bite that one-shots Numel, but this immediately brings out Torkoal. Expecting either Attract or Sunny Day, I pivot to -Pika, who is not about that life, but does Encore that turtle. This leaves the turtle completely at her mercy as she Electro Balls the Camerupt Flannery pivots into. Dang it, I'm still not used to the AI here swapping so much. I'm not in a great spot here, so out comes Mad Pika, again on a failed Attract, to start biting. The first hit does just less than half, and Camerupt uses Sunny Day. I don't have any great options here, so he tries another bite hoping for a high roll or maybe a flinch, but neither happens. Camerupt survives with basically no HP whatsoever and overheats Mad Pika to death. Well, that was disappointing. Expecting a heal, Buff Pika starts off with Arm Thrust to deal some chip, and then to stall out the sun. A sand boosted dig is strong enough to defeat him. For Torkoal, Buff Pika starts with a dig to avoid an overheat, and the turtle needs to use Sunny Day, again giving him a free turn to hit and KO with dig. That was actually some lucky timing right there. Last is Slugma, who poses no real threat as a single dig takes it out. But now it's time to put Mad Pika into the box. I'm going to miss his access to Bullet Seed, if nothing else. The next encounter we get ends up being Mimikyu, just in time for the normal gym. Now some people only consider the Pika clones to be electric rodents, but I personally include Mimikyu and Pika Blue among them. You also agreed with that assessment in this poll I took, so fake Pika is fair game. Not that I'll need him much for the battle against my father. Buff Pika starts off by arm thrusting Spinda, knocking it out in 2 hits. For slacking, he uses Dig. Norman misses a counter, and not wanting to never hit me, swaps to Vigoroth, which is completely fine because a Dig arm thrust combo takes it out. Lanoon survives the first arm hits, but fails to use Belly Drum because he has no health left. This brings us right back to slacking, and nothing has changed. Buff Pika is still fully healed and still has Dig. But let's start with Arm Thrust first to do a bit of extra damage and only get hit by a weak counter. For the next several turns, Buff Pika either digs or, when it's safe, uses Arm Thrust. Eventually, without getting hit again, slacking is defeated and Buff Pika soloed that gym like a typical jock. You know what's even more embarrassing than walking around in footy pajamas? Losing a fight to a guy walking around in footy pajamas. Eat it, Dad. Who's the embarrassment now? Okay, I'll admit, it's still me. I look like a dweeb. Anyway, I then capture a Marill just in time to learn Surf. Unfortunately, this surfing Pika is fat, not strong. Almost a wasted Pokemon now. In preparation for Winona, I shut down the power in New Mauville to get the Thunderbolt TM from Watson. I haven't mentioned this yet, but I did make my TMs reusable to match how it is in more recent games. This takes us to another Eevee battle, which hopefully goes better than last time. I don't know why this route has electric terrain, but I'm not mad Pika about it. I mean, a single Wild Charge from Buff Pika takes out Vaporeon, though it probably should have anyway. Fake Pika comes out to take a Psybeam. Disguise appears to work how it does in Gen 7, meaning he takes no damage after being hit. He heals a Confusion and takes another Psybeam, but 2 Shadow Sneaks defeats the best evolution. For Jolteon, I pivot to -Pika, who really only has Swift that can do any damage. After a few of those, I swap back to Fake Pika to avoid Double Kick, and then into Buff Pika to avoid Thunder Wave. At this HP, a Soft Sand Dig finishes Jolteon. Surfing Pika may be remarkably weak, but he still resists fire like nobody's business. This lets him start a rollout, which is not the best move, but always rather exciting. He does defeat Flareon, but is poisoned in the process. Umbreon confuses him and hits with Assurance, but against all odds, Surfing Pika hits through Confusion 3 times in a row, never missing a single rollout, and wins the battle with a sliver of HP. Rollout was certainly a risky strat, but it worked out pretty well. I don't think I'll try it again, even if Winona is practically begging for it with her flying types. Flying Pika starts the battle by acrobating Swablu. She survives the hit, and it's not till the second hit that I remember Swablu is a pure flying type, so Thunderbolt is a better option. For the real dragon, I swap to Surfing Pika, but he's not going to roll out. After 2 Dragon Dances, I'm anticipating an Earthquake, so Flying Pika makes a return, avoids the hit, and finishes off that thing with an Acrobatics after taking a Dragon Breath. Tropius is one-shot, as is Pelipper, though with Thunderbolt. Skarmory similarly falls in a single hit. I should probably have just left Flying Pika in the whole time there, because swapping was apparently pointless. About as pointless as hiking all the way to Mount Pyre just for Archie to run away from me. At least I do get another Pokemon in Plusle. He actually has an okay nature, so maybe I'll use him a bit, but not quite yet. First, it's time for our last rival battle, even though we had one like 2 minutes ago. Minus Pika starts off doing a remarkably poor job. Vaporeon survives 2 hits, confuses, and almost kills her. Not great, but Fairy Pika can finish the job. He then Volt Switches Flareon for the fire retardant Surfing Pika. He learned his lesson from last time, and surfs instead of rolling. For Jolteon, Buff Pika tries to dig, but Eevee May won't have it. Instead, Espeon is hit, and a second one for good measure. Flying Pika takes a ton from Sylveon's Draining Kiss, but 2 Acrobatics defeats the newest evolution. Jolteon comes back out to Thunderfang Buff Pika, only to fall to a Soft Sand Dig. Her final Pokemon is Umbreon, of course. Buff Pika, though, is perfectly poised to hit it with his arms a couple of times, and then Wild Charge for the win. Evolutions may be better than Pika Clones, but Pika Clones aren't too shabby either. Jumping ahead to Maxie, I'm anticipating a difficult fight, somewhat. Flying Pika is intimidated and slowed down by a horrendous face, but a few Thunderbolts knocks it out after some healing. For Camerupt, I pivot to Surfing Pika to one-shot with Surf, though he falls asleep thanks to Yawn. After a failed hit on Crobat, Buff Pika uses Wild Charge to one-shot the 4-winged bat. Okay, maybe it wasn't all that difficult. For the Tate and Liza double battle, I tried to figure out a way to have Minus Pika and Plus Pika out at the same time to use their abilities for once, but it didn't end up working out. I do still start with Plus Pika, who steals Claydol's Levitate ability just for funsies. Claydol takes Fake Pika's first Shadow Claw, but next turn, both Xatu and Claydol fall without doing any damage whatsoever. My Pika clones gang up on Lunatone, preventing him from attacking, while Solrock finally hurts someone with a pretty pathetic flamethrower. In response, he too is utterly destroyed by my Shadow Clone Jutsu. It wasn't the way I wanted it to go, but I can't really complain there. The Archie battle under the ocean I don't really expect to be all that dangerous. Surfing Pika needs to damage Mightyena a little bit, so Plus Pika can take it out with Thunderbolt. Sharpedo, and then Crobat, suffer the same fate, and that's all she wrote. Before waking up the Great Sky Dragon, I realize I forgot to get another Pika after the gym leader fight, so here he is in all his metal glory. At this point, Rayquaza stops it from raining on my parade, which I don't appreciate. Pika clones love the rain, specifically the impossible to miss thunder. Oh well, can't win them all, unless it's a water gym. Then I'll certainly win without breaking a sweat. Starting with the Love Fish, who is immediately thunderbolted by Fairy Pika. This should bait out an Earthquake, or not. Though it likely won't work, Flying Pika tries to force Wishcash to amnesia himself to death, but after getting to +6 defense, the AI gets smart and swaps to Kingdra. That's okay, I have a Dragon Killer right here in Surfing Pika. I don't think that's a very apt nickname though, because it takes so long for Playrough to finally defeat Kingdra. I got to the point where I was concerned he couldn't do it, but eventually he did. I again pivot to Flying Pika on Whiscash, though this time he Rain Dances. I Encore again, forcing him into Rain Dance, but am smart this time and use Thunderbolt right as he swaps into Crawdont. See, I can learn. Celio is also Thunderbolted, but survives with a sliver of HP and hits an Ice Beam, almost one-shotting Flying Pika. Well, it looks like I celebrated a bit too soon. Good thing he wasn't crit. He Volt Switches after a heal to Fake Pika who Shadow Claws. Whiscash would likely survive, so Pikachu hones his claws before swiping at the ground fish. It's at this point I realize that I still have one Pika clone left and the OG Pika himself. Since there are no more gym leaders, I decide to catch both the real Pikachu and Pachirisu, who will probably never see the light of day. Sorry not sorry. Now for OG Pika, I could use a Thunderstone to evolve him, but I decide to use a Sunstone instead. The end result? Another Surfing Pikachu. But this one is also Psychic type. I'll admit, I'm disappointed I didn't get him earlier, but it is what it is. In Victory Road, we encounter our rival, Wally. He does not have any evolutions, so this should be simple. Altaria starts to Dragon Dance, and after being roughly played with, swaps to Roselia. Flying Pika comes out to be leech seeded, but one-shots with a double power acrobatics. He Volt Switches for some chip, bringing out Fake Pika on a future sight. Shadow Claw easily takes out the Psychic Fairy. She stays into Shadow Claw Magneton 2, takes future sight, and then takes out the Magnet. She hasn't learned any fairy moves yet, but another claw is enough for Altaria. For Delcatty, I bring out Steel Pika, who resists everything this cat can dish out. Except for Sing, I suppose. That's what I get for trying to finish the battle with a Fell Stinger. After a heal, it actually works out, and Metal Pika kills something with that move. Not that it matters. After forming my final team, it is time for the Elite Four. Rather than lead with Buff Pika, I decide to give Metal Pika a shot. After all, she does learn Pin Missile. My plan is to try and get the attack boost with Fell Stinger against Mightyena, but after that sand attack and miss, I simply give up. Instead, buff Pika with a Shell Bell, just in case, Brick Breaks, or Wild Charges through Sydney's whole team. Again, not the way I wanted it to go, but Sydney forced my hand. For Phoebe, I did slightly cheat, letting OG Pika learn Electric Terrain because I wanted her ability to be somewhat useful. Since Surge Surfer doubles her speed, an Electro Ball does more damage the faster she is compared to the target, an Electric Terrain Surge Surf boosted Electro Ball one-shots this Dusclops. Sableye comes out next. I expected the other Dusclops to be honest, but she is also bald and falls. Now, unfortunately, the 3 extra levels this Dusclops has over the other one means there is a chance he would survive Electro Ball, and I don't want to be Earthquaked. Flying Pika, on the other hand, has no problem with it. Or it could just be a Shadow Ball. That makes sense too. Dang it! I keep forgetting that even though I'm playing through Hoenn, this is not the same Gen 3 AI I'm used to. It's more advanced. Anyway, that hit means that Flying Pika has to run away with Volt Switch into Surfing Pika on an Ice Beam. At least I called that move correctly. That fat guy takes the hit and begins to surf. After 2 hits, Fake Pika's disguise is broken on the swap, but Dusclops is low enough and falls to a Shadow Claw. Now Bayonet is obviously going to Shadow Ball, but even with a crit, Fake Pika can take the hit, so she Hone Claws to make Shadow Claw a one-hit KO, and is promptly taken out with a crit Shadow Ball. It looks like I miscalculated that, apparently. That sucks. He was going to be my main dragon killer too. I feel like I barely got a chance to use him. With a Magnet, Buff Pika's Wild Charge should be enough to one-shot, unless I miscalculated that too. Fantastic. She does survive, but after knocking it out, here comes another one. I can't risk losing Buff Pika, but I can Metal Pika. She takes a hit and flinches Bayonet, which is just what I needed. Wow, that was a tough battle. It didn't go at all how I had planned, and I lost Fake Pika. So, not great. For Glacia, I lead with Metal Pika to Zing Zap, which I totally thought would KO Celio. It doesn't, and even though I know she'll heal, I try to KO with Fell Stinger, but it doesn't work. Instead, she takes the time to set up an Electric Terrain before knocking out the Seal and healing with Shell Bell. Walrein presumably wants to try to Sheer Cold, and even though the boosted Zing Zap isn't enough, it flinches. Perfect. This is a very useful move. Metal Pika is doing pretty good. Now Glalie obviously takes the hit, but it doesn't do all that much to me. Metal Pika needs to restart the electric field, but I accidentally clicked it 2 times in a row, wasting a turn, and getting frozen as a result. Talk about adding insult to injury. Expecting another Ice Beam, Surfing Pika comes out, but his Brick Break is pathetic because he's just too fat. It takes 2 hits to deal that tiny amount of damage. And at this point, I'm making so many small risks that it's time to just bring out the big guns. Literally. Buff Pika Wild Charges Celio, and finishes the battle being up close and personal with Glalie. Since my primary plan for the Drake fight is no longer willing to participate, now it mainly falls to Surfing Pika. It's a good thing he has Ice Beam. Shelgon slows him down, and stalls a bit with healing and protect, but that's fine by me because it lets Surfing Pika heal with Shell Bell. Now, I wasn't sure who would come out next, but since it's Flygon, I know he's gotta be doing Earthquake. An Ice Beam would not necessarily be a one-shot, so I pivot to Flying Pika. He encores that Earthquake, and expecting a swap, Thunderbolts Salamence. He then Volt Switches back to Surfing Pika on a Flamethrower? That's not the move I was expecting, but it's a lot nicer for me. With that damage from Thunderbolt, Surfing Pika can take a hit and responds with Ice Beam. This brings Flygon back out, so again, Flying Pika encores. This time, he uses Acrobatics since there is no more chance of being intimidated. And it's Kingdra. Once again he Volt Switches, getting a crit to bring out Buff Pika. Expecting a heal, Buff Pika close combats, and then Brick Breaks. For the third time, Flying Pika avoids Earthquake and encores Flygon, again, using Acrobatics to get a free shot on Altaria, before Volt Switching again to Metal Pika. A single Zing Zap defeats Altaria. So, for the last time, Flying Pika can swap in to encore this Flygon. At which point, 3 Acrobatics later, and it's finally defeated. It was a bit of fun, forcing my opponent to swap a ton, so I get the free hits in. Normally, it's the other way around. We end up doing something pretty similar for Wallace. First though, Buff Pika wild charges Wailord, healing some of the recoil damage. This brings out Whiscash, and, you guessed it, he is encored into using Earthquake by Flying Pika. He then uses Thunderbolt, as Wallace swaps to Milotic. Another hit would not take out the Water Snake, thanks to that berry, so out comes Surfing Pika on a pathetic Ice Beam. He heals a Toxic, and tries to respond with a Play Rough, but misses, giving Milotic a chance to heal. Not that it really would have mattered, because that Play Rough was quite weak. He takes another hit before swapping to OG Pika on a Surf. A Thunderbolt finishes it off. Whiscash again tries to Earthquake, so I force him to do it a bit more. This time, Tentacruel is hit with Thunderbolt on the swap, and a second one does take it out. Ludicolo falls to a single Acrobatics, bringing out Whiscash again. Hoping he uses Amnesia, Flying Pika Acrobatics, and I called it correctly. This lets me hit with a few more Acrobatics before he finally swaps to Gyarados on a Thunderbolt. I saw that coming, Wallace. That Intimidate did make Acrobatics a bit weaker, so after forcing him into Amnesia again, I swapped to Buff Pika to finish off this champion with a close combat, proving that Pika Clones are awesome. Before completing the last challenge, it's with a heavy heart that Pikachu gets dropped off into the dead box. At least Mad Pika now has a friend. This final Steven battle starts with OG Pika thunderbolting Skarmory. This brings out Claydol with an Earthquake. As you might imagine, this means I pivot to Flying Pika to Encore. He thunderbolts Cradily on the swap, getting a Paralysis, which was awesome. He Volt Switches for some chip into Buff Pika, who is promptly confused. I totally thought he would use Ancient Power instead of Confuse Ray, so Buff Pika did not have a Person Berry. I decide to try and attack, and it actually works, defeating the plant. I'm not going to show all of the swaps and encores on Claydol because it happens again, and the strategy doesn't really change. But this time Steven swaps into Armaldo on a Thunderbolt. A Volt Switch into Buff Pika on what is now an Ancient Power lets her use Brick Break, taking it out. Another Claydol encounter later, Steven swaps into Metagross, the most concerning Pokemon on his team. I try to Volt Switch, like I've done a million times, but Steven saw that coming, apparently, bringing out Claydol, wasting my move. Well, this puts me in a not great position. Alright Surfing Pikachu, it's time to shine. Claydol starts with Light Screen, not the Ancient Power that I expected, so Surfing Pika uses Waterfall instead. It looks like this might go well until he Reflects, making that move also quite weak. Claydol heals and gets a critical Earthquake, bringing down Surfing Pika pretty low. Now he is at risk of dying here, but since Light Screen has just worn off, I kind of expected him to put it back up, so I take a risk and it does not work in my favor. Surfing Pika is Earthquaked to death. You know what? I know I gave him crap for, being fat, but he was surprisingly still useful in spite of not having huge power. I'm sorry, my friend. As if that weren't enough, I make a mistake here, miscalculating when the Reflect should wear off. It does not disappear when Flying Pika comes out, meaning that Acrobatics is not nearly strong enough. I need to waste a bit of time here because of that Light Screen, so I Encore Claydol, who then heals, before swapping into Metagross once again. Now Volt Switch does work, for whatever reason, into Spiky Pika for her battle debut. She takes a Psychic and sacrifices herself to Super Fang. This lets OG Pika Thunderbolt Steven's scariest Pokemon by far, though Claydol is still concerning. I do try one more round of Earthquake Encore, but he is apparently out of PP. Instead, I Encore Reflect using my last PP. He swaps into Aggron, who is immediately defeated in 2 Thunderbolts, which means that Claydol is the only Pokemon left. But with no Earthquakes, he poses no challenge. I could swap into almost anybody at this point, but I let Flying Pika finish the battle with a couple of acrobatics, signifying the end of the Hoenn region. Even though a lot of the Pika clones are quite similar in appearance, a lot of them tend to have pretty unique and interesting secondary typings, like Emolga, who was a huge savior at the very end of this run. Before you take off, I'd like to thank my YouTube and Patreon members for their support. I really appreciate it, and if you're able to, consider joining for exclusive perks. Also, see the Google Drive link in the description if you want to play this game for yourself. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next region.